All right, welcome back. This is part two, and as you might guess, we're going to start going into more details now with the visual realism here, adding more detail to our scene for the river canyon or other mountain scenes. We're going to create new ones every time. This one here, I just saved a little animation. Let's take a quick look at what that looks like. It's 512 by 512 in dimensions, and there's a small animation flying into the scene and then back a little bit to the side, and it has a little bit of everything in there. But one of the things we want to do is not just create it, we want to also perhaps use it in another program, right? This is one thing that we see quite a lot, is that we may want to render something in Howler, right? But this might not be the final, and that might not be the final rendering. You may need to export some of these resources that we haven't even created yet, but we will want to know that you can export them and save them. Perhaps you want to use them in Carrara or some other 3D program. And so at some point we'll want to make sure that we can save these images, like the texture map. This one here is the elevation map or the height map. And it's not just the original height map we created, right, with the plasma noise and some other techniques, but this one here also has the erosion and some sediments. So all of that can be retrieved from the 3D designer, can be recovered, and then you can save it as a grayscale image, 8-bit deep or something like that. This one here is the Z buffer, the depth buffer, also known as, and it's possibly useful if you want to, for instance, if you want to do something like applying blur based on the distance, so that it's blurring farther, it's blurring more at the big distance, and anything that's close will not be blurred. So there's a lot of times when you need some of that information, controlling certain filters based on the depth. Same thing with the erosion. We have the ability, obviously, as we've seen in other tutorials, to generate an erosion, apply an erosion on the terrain, and it actually generates this erosion map that it then uses to displace the terrain. But you can also save that erosion map to, for instance, do something else to it. If you want more erosion, what you could do is click this to bring it back into play here, and as you have that erosion and you say, well, I need a little bit more, I need more erosion, what you could do is perhaps use the photographic filter for light diffusion and apply a bit more erosion by simply spreading this, the bright stuff, right, the bright pixels, having that diffuse and spread into the darker areas. That in itself will cause a widening of the canyons, the rivers, the creeks. And so if you see here, after applying that, if I undo that, you'll see it crisper. And obviously you can also do other things there. You can change the value, use the value controls here for making it darker or brighter, increase the contrast, control that, the gamma, and so on. So there's a lot of different ways to take some of these color maps, elevation maps, height maps. Let's see, what else do we have here? There is, this one here is a lighting map. In fact, we have two. When you save the lighting, you have two light sources, so each of those are saved. You have this one here that was sort of a light, a bluish light from the very top, high above the terrain, and this one here is the one that was placed all the way on the side. So obviously the two might be needed individually, or you might want to combine them together in some sort of a screen blend mode, or perhaps sort of a blend mode between one and the other, to have a little bit of that bluish tint in the shades, in the shadow regions as well. So that's really the idea, is to say, well, what can we do to perhaps work on these in other programs or separately. There is another thing here and here and here, right? Those three maps represent the different colored regions that the texture map has, right? When you look at this one here, there's a little bit of green still. You can see the green, that's the grassy area. Then there's quite a bit of gray zone, and that's the rocks, and then there's of course the snowpacks, the white parts. And so those three different and distinct regions can be not only applied inside of 3D Designer, as you see here. The rendered image out of 3D Designer contains some gray rocky areas, contains some white snowy areas, and also some green grassy, although in this scene it's probably hidden somewhere on the other side behind the clouds. Can't really see it too well there. But that's basically what that is. Here we have the colors, and here we have masks representing the three different regions. So it's not based on anything other than wherever did we apply the snow, wherever did we apply the rocks, and where did we put the grass. I think this one here is the grassy areas. There's only a little bit of it. There's a little bit more on the rocks, or maybe that one is, I don't remember. But this one here is probably the snow, because there's plenty of that all over the scene. So those are also savable. And then here's of course the very original, the first map. That was the one I started from. That's the terrain. So let's go again, re-step, recreate our steps here, and go back in time, understanding how we've seen in the prior tutorial how to create a terrain like this with perhaps a canyon going through it, or some ridges and some other things. But let's see now how to actually go beyond that. We would go, first of all, we would go to, where is it? The Transform 3D Designer. Right. In fact, let me do this. I'm going to move these over here a little bit. And then use this to move that with the Control and Shift key. I can move the terrain, make it a little bit bigger. It's a relatively small one here just for the demonstration. So what I'll do is I'll go to Transform and go into 3D Designer. And it still remembers my most recent settings. I'm going to disable the ambient occlusion, get it a little bit crisper here, and then keep in mind that as you use those sliders to control and change the all sorts of different parameters, it temporarily switches to a faster, lower resolution map, right? So the sample steps, you can actually force them to be very coarse, but usually you want it at the very highest quality. But while you're updating, to make it a little bit faster, you can see that it switches to a lesser resolution. Look at this here, there's a lot of detail here, and the moment I grab this slider, it switches to something much coarser, much less detail. But that's only temporary, right? And it's done so that we can have a fairly quick interaction with it. Alright, so let me undo a bunch of things here. Let me undo the clouds, let me remove the erosion, let me remove the sediments, let me, you know what, the coloring, we probably we could go just to the base color here. All of these different things we will learn in the other chapters, how to control them, how to set them, how to make use of them so that they look great. What we want to do is really, in this tutorial, just see that we have some of those. We don't need to be an expert quite yet at them. What we do want to know is also focus on this part down here, right? This is the area where you go and store or export or save them. And so the idea is that any of these maps I showed you earlier, the color maps, the masks, the lighting, and so on, that's exactly where it's happening. So let's say you have some erosion. Let's apply that erosion. Let's say we do have some sediments, and you see the sediments happening here. Let's say we do add some creature, excuse me, texture, not creature. Let's add some texture for coloring some snowpacks, or maybe actually we'll switch to more of a green spring look. There we go, we got some fields, but we still have some snow maybe in the upper elevation. Get the rocks down a little bit. And you know what, you can also do the sediments without coloring, and it will really all be based on the elevation now. Elevation and slope, actually, both of them working hand in hand. So let's see, we do this. We have the light source coming in perhaps from a sharp angle like this. Maybe we have it up a little bit higher or a little bit lower. We have the second light source, this one here. This one we can make, you know, darker. Let's reduce the fog. That's really just used here. We don't export that fog information into coloring. That's used in the render inside of 3D Designer. So if we are actually going to use this scene in another program, like in Carrara or any Lightwave, any 3D program that you may already use, you may want to export the elevation map, right? The height map. We call it the depth map here, store depth map. All right, so let's go from top to down here. Top one here is store masks. Which masks are we talking about? Well, it's those three things here. We got the grass, the rock, and the snow. And if we've set those, if we've created that, and we said we want to adjust that, then we may want to actually save those, export those. So we can then actually put that into a multi-layered shader where we use the same coloring based on slope and elevation. That's where those colors will be determined, or how they'll be applied. Let me change some of the cutoff here, make it a little bit crisper. There you go. So that kind of thing you want to save, easy. Let's just click here, store masks, and you see three images being stored. Now they're not saved to file yet, they're just stored, so you can later get to them and then one by one save them out to file if you decide which one you want to use. Next thing, we have store lighting. So again, we have two light sources. This one here, the top, that's this one here. This one also can cast light or shadows. It could be a fine but very crisp edge, or it could be a soft edge. So you can click that again and say soft. But either way, this one will cast, the light source will cast shadows if you let it. And then there is the other light source up here, which can give sort of an overall skylighting effect, as if it's coming from this surrounding bright sky around it. Let me adjust this here a little bit. So we can have those two light sources, the lighting effect from those also saved. So click here, store lighting, and there are two images saved, right? One for each light source. Then there is another option to export, and that's the erosion. So the amount of erosion you can see here, you can get rid of altogether, or you can go to a very high maximum, or anywhere in between. And maybe I need to zoom in a little bit and see it from an angle where the light source is giving me, like this one here is good, or I'm sure if I turn around this to a different angle, yeah, there you go, this flank has a lot of erosion showing. So let me reduce the height a little bit. Let me also bring it a little bit to the left. There you go, a little bit back, a little bit like this. Okay, just so we understand what that erosion does. If I take it away, you see the original terrain. Well, not exactly. We actually have also something else here. Let me reduce that to sediments. Okay, this is the original terrain. This is the elevation map as is in its original form, although we can change how much of that extrusion we actually see. Now, right now we are seeing it colored because we did earlier apply the create texture option, but we can that color is coming from the swap image. So we could also go just take it from the image itself. Let me disable the fog here. There you go. So you actually see the image right here. You see the image that's used as an elevation map. Right, you see, and let me go without fog as well. There you go. So here we have the actual image that's being used as an elevation map, and we can use it right here. We can see it being used to displace that terrain. The brighter it is, the higher up it goes. Right. Let me turn the shadows off. So now here we have just the terrain in its original form, but there are some additional displacements you can have. This one here is the sediment deposits, right? And there's also sediments that can be filling the cracks or the creeks or the rivers more or less, right? By default it's all the way up, but you can reduce this a little bit. So if you do have erosion, you'll see some of the filling in there or not so much. So let's see what that looks like. Let's do without sediments first. Here we go. If you've not done the erosion initially, it will take a second or two to calculate it initially. It generates that erosion map. Right, so but once you've done that, you can navigate through that, you can scrub through that pretty quickly, and it will let you apply that displacement to the mesh, representing that erosion. And again, so that's an erosion map that's laid on top of this terrain, and you can see it here. pretty nicely. You can extrude it, and you'll see that extrusion based on this. Now here's the sediment. So the question, what I wanted to show you is, of course, you store that. So store the erosion. Boom. Now you have that erosion map right there. Now I can't go in there and interact with it yet because I'm still inside of 3D Designer. But let's see the next part. That's the sediments. That one will also modify the elevation or the depth map, right? So the resulting color or the resulting terrain that you see there, you may, for instance, if you remove the amount and the sediments here, you have no sediments filling in, and it's very deep here in the carvings, right? The terrain is being carved by that erosion, and if you now reduce the erosion, you can get to a point where you barely see that. But you can also do something else, and that's to add some sediments and add the amount of filling in those creeks. So there's some amount of sediments being generated, but how much of that you actually see is the second slider here. Normally you put that to the max, and then you adjust how much sediments are being generated. Again, you can change also whether that should be colorized, whether that should be mapped to the snow, to the rocks, or to the grass, or just it figures it based on its elevation and some other options, other parameters. So all of these will affect the height map. Right, so you can have something like this, and now you say, okay, I need to save that. Oh wait, maybe we need to add some pre-filtering, a little bit of smoothing, that sort of thing. So now let's say this is the terrain you want, and you're going to take that into another program, maybe again a 3D program of your choice. And what you want to do is simply click on store. This one, the depth map, right? So that one will store not the original grayscale value that represented the elevation map, but the new one resulting from additional changes you've applied, namely the erosion and the sediments. Those are modifying the displacement map or the height map. All right, what else can we store here? We actually skipped one here, and that's the Z buffer. And that's, of course, information about how far the pixels are that it sees in the scene. So if you have a scene like this, some of the pixels are very close. I don't care if they're dark or if they're light, but they are close. And you can see them at its base object color. Again, we can change that to have just one color here. Or you can see them in fact, you know, let's give it kind of a snow look, a little bit of bluish tint and a bit of a snowy look there, and then also increase the specular highlight here. So that's something that we have also in 9.5. We've improved on the quality of that specular highlight, the dynamic range there. But at any rate, what we can do is let's see, give it something like this. Here's a scene where we have a lot of pixels very close, and then we have a bunch of them all the way far. So the Z buffer obviously will have a very deep range of some pixels very close, some pixels very far. And it may be of interest to store that information. That's exactly what that does. Like, store the Z buffer, and you see here that it's kind of dark going brighter and all the way to the brightest spot in the far distance. Now, why is it that way? Because most of the time what you want to do next is use this to apply a filter that will only apply to that particular range. It will apply more in the back, for instance, to blur it, and it will apply less in the front in order to not blur it so much, right? Of course, you can further adjust that and work on that and make it so, for instance, that there is actually no blurring at all up to perhaps a certain distance, and then it starts blurring. But that's the image processing, the post work you can do with the other filters and some other tools. So here we go. Let's go on to the next part. We have store depth map. We've already seen that. So we also have the store texture. So if we have a texture, if we created a texture and it's already there, we can see it in the swap image. That texture contains colors representing the grass in the lower valleys, in the lower parts of the valleys. And then we have also, let me get a different, there you go, there's a good angle here. Perhaps a little bit more from the top. There you go. So we have snow at the top, we've got the gray rock colors, and we got the deep valley green. And so all of these we can adjust, right? You have the green, pushing that all the way to the top. You get the snow, you can make it disappear if you want, or just have a tiny little bit there, late summer. and here we got the rock area, and some of that can also spill into other parts, like the lower parts of the valley, and that's this part here. The sediments that you can adjust can not only be there, it can also be colorized differently. Right, so for instance, if you wanted to show rock, gravel, all of that dark gray falling down as a result of the erosion and avalanches and that sort of things, what you could do is say, don't keep it not colorized, but actually colorize it to the rock. So you get all of this stuff down here colorized to gray. Or if you want snow on top of that, you could say, let's use the snow color, whatever that color is. And that's the thing too, is you can actually adjust that too. If you want to be on Mars and you want to have some brownish colors there, some sand dust, that's one way to do it. Of course, green is not likely to happen here. You could, for instance, use, instead of green, you could use a different rock, a different sediment color. And so now you have a little bit more variety there. And same with the rock, the grayish. Let's say we give it something like this. So now you have a mix of different brownish or reddish or orangey colors, and still the ability to change how much of these are there, how many of these colors are showing in a very crisp cutoff. You can adjust that here with these parameters, smoothing, or have very little of it or very a lot of it. So a lot of different parameters to play with, but it all comes down in the end to this. Do you want to use this inside of a final render in 3D Designer, inside of Howler, or do you want to export it and then use it inside another program? Right? So when you use it in another program, you need to store the textures. That's the entire combination of this image here, as seen from the top, right? Something like, I guess you could say something like this here. Something like this, but flattened and without any shading. So that's the color map that we will want to save when we say store texture. And there it is. All right. So that the other thing that we also want is the lighting, the masks. Okay, the masks we saw already. Actually, that's at the very big top of the list here, but it's perhaps one of the last things. I mean, you do apply these colors, and then you say, okay, I think I need to have a mask so that, for instance, wherever the light orange colors of the sand is, maybe you want to add a little bit of painted details on top of that. So it's great to have that mask. It's great to have a representation that's black and white, right, a grayscale, where it shows where are the pixels where this particular color is selected, is present. And so you can do that simply by storing the mask. That will store 3 images, grayscale, you see them right there. They're actually behind each other, but it will represent the grass, the rocks, and the snow. All right, and that's pretty much it. There's one more on the image side, and that's alpha. That means alpha equals z. What that means is that it takes the z buffer, the z depth information, and puts that directly into the alpha channel. It's kind of like skipping a step. If you were to take this one first to store the z buffer, you could then after that decide, oh, let's go and actually load that into the alpha channel. But that's not always the way you use it. If you do want to use it that way, though, you can go directly here. Alpha equals z. That basically sends the z buffer depth information into the alpha channel, right? And then you have the mask you want to apply your filtering and blurring and whatnot. There's one more here, and that's the save OBJ. Now, when you save OBJ, you're saving the terrain not as a grayscale elevation map or height map. What you do is you save it as a file containing the 3D topology, the geometry, right? This is a 3D file, or a file containing 3D points and no vertices, the wavefront OBJ file. Now, this is a very popular format, so you can use it in a number of other programs and import that. And we'll probably finish this tutorial by showing a final render that was done in one of my favorite 3D programs. And then we'll just see what that looks like, right, importing it. But basically what that is a file like this. Right? Here is one I saved earlier, and I'm going to open it through Notepad++, and that's where you can see what's in that file. Right? It's a simple wavefront OBJ file, and this one here, I've actually now converted my Windows 8.1 to the English form, so I am getting the punctuations correctly here, the periods. Before I was seeing commas here, and that's because I was configured with the French localized version of Windows, and so the output was using commas on all of these decimal points. That can cause problems for some importers of OBJ files. So if your 3D program needs an OBJ file that is standardized to English punctuation, you can easily change this. This is the only place where a period or a comma would show. So you can do a Control F to find all occurrences of commas and replace them with the period. So that's what I did. And actually, no, I didn't have to do that anymore because, like I said, I changed to the English version of Windows 8. So that's good. That means it's easy cheesy, and this will save the file into OBJ, and then we can use that into another program. All right, enough said. This is pretty much the end of the tutorial I wanted to do in this part 2. It's kind of funny because we went over all these different, or a number of these different details that can be exported. So, and you might consider that that's perhaps the last thing we do, right? Normally, let's first get busy and learn how to do these, and then worry about saving it. But I really don't think that that's so much the case. I think the most important thing is to actually know why you're doing this. And if the answer to that is that you're going to use it in another program, then you really want to know up front, well, how am I going to save that, and what do I need to be aware of? What do I need to look out for as I'm creating some of these resources and saving them later on? So how do you save those actually? If I'm canceling out of this here, well, maybe I do a final render. There you go. Okay, that. So I have my final render here, and I say that's not what I really wanted. What I wanted are those saved resources, like the mask here with the snow and the rock and the grass. These are the selection levels for snow, rock, and grass. You can save those, right? How do you do that? Well, you simply select it, and then it's in the image here, and then you can go to the file and save, right? And save it as the format of the image you want. PNG is recommended, TIFF will work, JPEG okay, but it's lossy, it's not lossless. So there's a couple of image formats, Targa, TGA, and BMP bitmap file. All of these will work. You can also, here is the color, the texture map as we call it, right? These are the colors, and you see the green, for instance, in the upper right corner here, there's the green. So this probably is the green map. This one here is not. That's something else. That's probably the brownish area that you see here, right? This big blob, brown. Actually, it's not there. That's black. So that means it must be the stuff around it. Maybe it's the green, the greenish part here. Yeah, maybe not. Maybe I'm looking at the inverted image there. At any rate, there are some others. Here's the depth map, right? Now, if you wanted to load that straight into the alpha channel to actually work on it from here, you can do that too. You can go and, for instance, go to the selection and store the current selection. Even though there isn't any, I mean, yes, there is one, there's always some selection, and this one is the selection of everything. So store alpha, and then you see it right there, everything is selected, the alpha channel was all enabled, and you can do get image. Now you have a copy here in the stored image, and then you can say, let's go replace the alpha. Boom, now you have actually a transitional mask going from dark to bright along this direction based on that grayscale image, and that's now in the alpha channel, which means that some parts you can easily paint on, some other parts not so much. Or you can add a filter to that. For instance, you can do the blur, Gaussian blur, and when you think about it, the wider parts indicate where it's easily accessible or highly enabled, and therefore the blurring will be very strong, right? And you see that here it's blurring the parts in the back. The ones in the front, not so much. And that's exactly what we want. That's how we use those depth buffer or Z buffer masks. Let's go take a look at another one. Here's the light map. Let's minimize this. Oh yeah, here's the elevation map with the terrain, I mean with the displacement or the sediments and the rivers, the erosion, all of this incorporated into it, right? So yeah, that's That's basically the modified elevation map. That's one we definitely want to take into in a 3D program as well. If we don't work with the OBJ file, we can work with this one. Get many like programs like Bryce and Carrara. You can load a JPEG image or a bitmap file of some sort, such as this one. In fact, so let me do that. Let me go save something like this. I'm in my River Canyon 2. And I'm gonna save it as a PNG file, so it's lossless. And this one will be elevation with sediments and rivers. Alright, so that image having been saved, I can now go into another 3D program, load it in, use it as a displacement map or elevation terrain map, and start doing some more work with that in the other programs. Alright, thanks for watching. This was another short one, not so much, not a long one, but it's important to understand what those different things are so we can work with them as needed, and also important, of course, to know how to save them, such as this one here with the color. Let me save that one as well. So that's save. So here's the elevation, here's, let's call this one texture. Right, and that's all we'll probably use in my 3D program. The texture, the elevation, we could obviously apply the lighting or some other things. If you want to bake it in, like in a game environment, you may want that lighting calculation actually baked into it. That's why we also export the light information. So alright, thanks for watching and stay tuned for more.